When you think of beer, what comes to mind? Partying? Hangovers? Yeah, we've all been there. But less often do we stop and consider what, as a society, beer has given us. You know, besides headaches and things we later have to apologize for. Today on Weird History Food, we're talking 10 surprising innovations brought to us by beer. But before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the Weird History Food channel. And let us know in the comments below about what other types of booze you would like to know more about. Okay, this one is tapped and ready to pour. Refrigerators, keeping your food fresh and your beer cold since the 1880s. Did you know that before fridges, we used to have to rely on ice to keep our beer cold? Large chunks of ice had to be delivered by an ice guy and stored in a basement. Talk about a hassle. But it was especially hard on breweries, which could only make beer in the colder months, as too much heat killed off the yeast and ruined the beer. Then Carl von Linde came along. As an employee at the Spaten Brewery in Munich, Linde thought he could use electricity to power mechanical refrigeration. And boy howdy, was it a hit. These fridges were everywhere by the 1880s. Thanks to refrigeration, breweries could brew all year round and even pop up in locations without access to ice. And sure, fridges could do other stuff too. They kept meat from spoiling and milk from souring, extended the life of vegetables and fruits, and allowed Jell-O to set in record time. So yes, refrigeration may be the single greatest advancement in modern food storage. Heck, even some medicines need refrigeration, so let's say health in general. And who do we have to thank for this modern miracle? That's right, beer. Without beer, you might not have a fridge at all to keep those lagers nice and frosty. Now, let's crack one open and pour some out for Carl von Linde, a king amongst beer brewers and a hero of humankind. Prost! While not technically invented for beer, suds are almost solely responsible for the rise in glass bottles. Ketchup, baby milk, and medicine may be fine and dandy, but one of the earliest examples of large-scale mechanical productions came from two men making long-necked beer bottles. Michael Joseph Owens, creator of the bottling machine, teamed up with Libby Glass, no relation to the product, and the two found massive success with their automated bottle builder. By the 1930s, the machine could spit out 12 bottles per minute. The duo's automated glass bottler had become an international success. The two had a lock on the market as well, with the Owens Illinois Glass Company owning the exclusive rights to produce containers for brandy, wine, and other specialty bottles. Eventually, OI, as it's now known, did relax its glass-clad grip on the bottling industry. They sold Heinz the right to bottle their own ketchup, Hazel Atlas to do general bottling, and Ball Brothers to make fruit jars. But OI remains the largest glass container manufacturer in the world, with 1 out of every 2 glass bottles being made by the company. And they could have never done it without two men who had a dream of packaging delicious, delicious suds. Who knew that the process of pasteurization, which is now commonly associated with milk, actually started with beer? Louis Pasteur wasn't trying to fix milk by removing it of harmful bacteria. He was trying to solve a problem for local breweries who were tired of their beer going sour. An equally noble goal, to be honest. As part of his job at the University of Lille, Pasteur was hired to help local industries. And in 1856, he was sought out by a local wine merchant to help figure out why beer and its products soured so quickly. By studying fermentation, which occurs when adding yeast to beer, Pasteur discovered bacteria was the culprit. Pasteur learned that quickly heating and cooling the beer would eliminate the problem. And voila, pasteurization was born. It also helped create the scientific germ theory. Before pasteurization, people believed that pathogens spontaneously generated inside the body. Germ theory proved that pathogens are actually introduced via external substances, like bacteria spread via food, organic waste, or, yes, even beer. In the end, pasteurization's whole helping the progress of modern medicine angle was just an added bonus to Louis Pasteur's real-life calling, to make getting buzzed not taste so damn bad. We also have beer to thank for innovations in thermodynamics. Specifically, hats off to James Joule, the 19th century British scientist responsible for discovering the Joule-Thomson effect. For those of you who are not members of the James Joule fan club, The Joule-Thompson effect is the cooling or heating of a gas when it expands or is compressed, and not the experience of sucking on a strawberry cheesecake vape. It seems like a small thing, but it had a massive effect on our understanding of thermodynamics. And it all started from his love of beer. Joule owned a brewery, and one day noticed that his barreled beer was colder than the air surrounding it. That got him interested in mechanical temperatures. The only problem was that the requirements for measuring heat and cold were laborious, requiring him to work alone non-stop for hours at a time in order to get a correct read of ambient temperature. The length some people will go for the perfect pull. But even with all that, there was still no way to measure the heat of gases. So Joule thought to himself, maybe if we just add mercury. As it turns out, mercury thermometers were much more accurate than the air thermometers currently being used at the time. But perhaps maybe even more importantly, Joule developed the mechanical heat ratio, again to help out with his bar business, which eventually became the basis of the science of energy. Not bad for a guy who just wanted to keep his kegs of beer cold. pH levels measure the acidity or alkalinity of a substance and is considered the backbone of scientific research involving beakers and test tubes and the like. They just love measuring pH. Every liquid, from water to the gunk in the human body, has an optimal pH level. How do we know that? Because some Danish brewers got annoyed that they couldn't consistently measure beer. Back in the early 19th century, Søren Sørensen, the scientist so nice they named him twice, was working at the Carlsberg Brewery in Denmark, where the owners were growing frustrated that each batch of brew had different acidity levels. Carlsberg devised a handy scale that measured the concentration of hydrogen ions in a solution. A pH of 7 is neutral. Anything lower was acidic, while anything higher was alkaline. Ta-da! Suddenly, Carlsberg Brewery was able to monitor the fermentation process of their beer. And the rest of the world's scientists were gifted with a way to measure the acidity and alkalinity of solutions. Solutions like beer. Another measuring tool we have beer to thank for is the T-Test. It's basically a way to understand if two things are the same or different, but more sciencey. Back in the early 1900s, there was a scientist named William Seeley Gossett, who worked in an Irish pub that sold Guinness. There was no real way at the time to know what was affecting the quality of any given batch of the beer. Was it the weather, the type of barley used, the mood of the person brewing it? Who knew? Sample sizes were really small, and new batches would take a whole year to produce, which would be subject to different conditions than the prior crop. So Gossett came up with a game. He realized if you took two groups of data and compared them, and the results were the same, then what you were measuring for didn't make a difference in the result. But if you took two groups and they were different, then what you were testing for was having an effect on the outcome. Sounds simple, right? But this blew people's minds. Gossett published his T-Test study in an academic journal under the name Student, because he wasn't technically allowed to take credit for his ingenious methodology. So the next time you're wondering, how can we test a hypothesis from small samples where the standard deviation is unknown? Pour one out for old Gossett, preferably a Guinness. You may know that carbon dioxide is a gas that is released when we burn things, exhale, or belch. But did you know that carbon dioxide is also an essential ingredient in the production of beer? Well, you do now. And that's all thanks to a guy named Joseph Priestley. He first discovered that air wasn't just like one type of substance, but a bunch of different gases. Priestley lived next to a brewery and noticed that bubbles of gas would fall off during the fermenting process onto the ground, meaning that they were heavier than the air surrounding it. If you remember from earlier, fermenting is a process that creates the sudsy bubbles in beer thanks to the yeast, which is used to kill bacteria. Another fun byproduct of yeast is carbon dioxide. Priestley figured out how to replicate carbon dioxide bubbles sans the alcohol, leading to the creation of all other fuzzy pops, like soda, seltzer, Mike's Harder Lemonade, you name it. Priestley was so bowled over by his discovery that he was like, wait, what other types of airs are out there in the world? He discovered 6 more, which today we call gases, including one even more intoxicating than the carbon dioxide found in beer. That's right, thanks to Priestley and beer, we now have laughing gas. Ah, the age of exploration. It was a time when brave sailors set off into the unknown, seeking new lands and new riches. But let's be real, the voyages were long, and there wasn't exactly a 7-Eleven around every corner to resupply. So the rations on board had to last for months, maybe even years. And what were those rations, you might ask? They included all sorts of tasty treats like hard cheeses, honey, olives, and anchovies. But perhaps the most important item on the list was beer. That's right, those sailors drank nothing but beer on their long voyages. And not just any beer either. We're talking barrels and barrels of the good stuff. It wasn't strange for a sailor to be rationed over a gallon of beer daily. Where's the rum gone? Out the window to make room for more beer. You see, water would spoil below deck, but beer was a reliable source of hydration that wouldn't go bad. Plus, it probably helped ease the boredom of being stuck on a ship for months on end. There's only so many sea shanties you can sing. So the next time you raise a pint of beer, just remember that you have those brave explorers of the age of exploration to thank for paving the way. Turns out the reputation of what would you do with a drunken sailor was well earned. Cheers, matey. You know what they say, beer is the drink of history. Wait, do they say that? And who is they? Well, whoever coined the phrase couldn't be more accurate when it comes to the early days of colonial America. Back in Europe, people weren't exactly fans of drinking water. It was considered unsafe, because it usually was. Hello, Black Plague. So they all drank beer instead. But when the first settlers came to America, they had to make do with water. The problem was, the further south they settled, the more likely this water was to be infected with dangerous pathogens. Take the Pilgrims, for example. When they were contemplating their journey to America in the 1600s, one of their key concerns was getting sick because they had to drink water. The sailors, fearing that the passengers were consuming too much of their beer, dumped the Pilgrims farther north than they would have liked. But the settlers were pleasantly surprised to find that the northern water was actually quite tasty to drink. So we have beer to thank for landing on Plymouth Rock. But at the time, there wasn't much to celebrate. The death rate was pretty unsustainable for the American settlers. But in 1630, a bunch of the Puritans in the Virginia colony began brewing beer themselves. It was literally a lifesaver for the colonists. So the next time you raise a pint to your lips, just remember that you have the early colonists of America to thank for bringing beer to the New World. Sure, you might be telling yourself, well, I guess for these nerdy science and world history types, beer is important. But what about me, an average college student? Well, first of all, cram it. Second of all, have you ever heard of this thing called communism? That's right. The philosophical doctrine that's had a huge impact on the world for over a century might never have come about if it weren't for a legendary beer drinking session between two friends. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels were the brains behind communism, but they were also two wild and crazy guys. Marx's first year of college was a wild rampage, according to his father. Apparently, he would regularly knock back pints while finishing his PhD, and presumably listening to Chumbawamba. Engels, on the other hand, big wine guy. He spent 4 months on tour in France and was drunk the entire time. So it's no surprise that when Engels and Marx met in Paris, these two lushes decided to turn on the hose together and do some work. But this wasn't your average college bender. No, Marx and Engels embarked on a 10-day marathon of beer-soaked discussions. It was during these long, hazy sessions that Engels and Marx broke down and formulated the basis of what would be the Communist Manifesto, which was like, capitalism sucks, LOL. The manifesto has survived over time and its origins, two creators getting blackout drunk and scribbling it down on bar napkins between barf breaks. Cheers! So what do you think? What's the greatest innovation brought about by beer? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, be sure to check out some of these other weird history food videos.